Tarps, like tarps for hammocks, are considered shelter, and your shelter is part of your big three for hiking and backpacking. I got a new one, and this is the one that I'm taking on my thru hike of the Appalachian Trail. Hey YouTube, Todd here, and welcome to this week's Hiking a Different Path. Now, I know you can see the tarp behind me, and I promise we're gonna go through what I bought and the pros and cons of what I selected. Over the years of hanging, camping, hiking with a hammock as my primary sleep system, I've tried and used a lot of tarps, from ASIM to hex, seal nylon to Dyneema to membrane seal, and tarps with doors and without. Doors? Yeah, I know. Door sounds funny, but it's a thing, and it's a very useful thing in the right circumstances. I started out with a Hennessy hammock, and it's a great hammock, whether you see it as just an entry-level hammock or it's your go-to choice for hammock shelters. But I started with the Hennessy ASIM tarp also. Now, that's a great tarp. It's fully waterproof, just enough coverage for the hammock, if not a little bit on the heavy side of the tarp weight spectrum. Now, I changed to the Hennessy Hex tarp next. Same material, same great waterproof usability, but more coverage and more weight. I even played around with an Eno Hex tarp for a minute. Now, not being snobby here, but it was a short-lived tryst, I assure you. Okay. I then went to a Hammock Gear Dyneema standard tarp with doors. Now, all doors really are is a pair of flaps on each end of the tarp that can be guyed down to effectively close off the end of the tarp, thus reducing the wind or rain coming through the end of the tarp. Now, these are really great tarps that Hammock Gear makes. Waterproof, great coverage, and customizable to your hammock length, and best of all, they are wicked light. Think 8 ounces out of the package minus the lines. That's sick, and it never ceased to amaze me whenever I picked mine up. And at that time, green, if you want to call that green, was the going color, and that's what you got. Now, there were 2 knocks on the Dyneema tarp in my mind. One, it was pretty translucent. Not a huge issue unless you hope to sleep past sunrise or during a full moon. It's an easy issue to overcome though. Still, the other knock was the sound of the tarp when it rained. A Dyneema tarp properly set up is a beauty to stay dry under in a rainstorm. It's also a bit like a snare drum. The sound can be a little tinny, which may bother some and not others. The knocks like these are personal preference kinds of things, and they're just not deal breakers. After a bit of time with the Dyneema and having gotten a few years experience under my belt about what I liked and didn't like in a tarp, I thought I might design my own. Now, I have a friend named Dale who is quite possibly the nicest, most gracious person I know on the planet. He's handy like me, but he's also handy with a thread injector. That's a sewing machine for others. Men don't sew. We inject thread. Anyway, we're handy, and as my mom always told me, if people can't find you handsome, well, they should at least find you handy. Dale and I got together on a design. I bought the fabric. It was a 0.9 membrane seal nylon that is super slick, really light, and real opaque. A few weeks later, I had the tarp to rule all others. Now, I've got a couple of videos that go on and on about that tarp. The bottom line is it's huge by tarp standards and light for the size. Think 12 feet long at the ridgeline and almost 10 feet across at the sides. Now, I still love it, and it's pretty much perfect to and for me, with one exception when it comes to doing a thru hike: the weight. Hey, I was honest. I told you guys, anything and everything is up for debate when it comes to the thru hike and what I take and how much it weighs. Nothing, and I mean nothing, is sacred. That being said, what did I wind up going with for the thru hike? Well, I went back to hammock gear and got another Dyneema standard with doors, but in the woodland camo this time. Straight from the shipping box in its carry sack, this tarp weighs in at 8 ounces. Now, that is huge, at least to a gram weenie, difference in weight from my membrane seal tarp. The 0.9 membrane seal tarp, lines and all, comes in just over 20 ounces. Now that's still really light for a tarp of that size, but I knew I needed to do better for the thru hike on weight. So how did I set up the tarp in regard to lines? Pretty much the same way as a membrane seal tarp with a couple of exceptions. Now, I'm going to list all the places where you can get these individual components from in the description below. So if you want to set up your tarp the same way, well, you can. And I'm putting together another video with more details on splicing and other component uses. I went with a continuous ridge line of red zinget. I have a titanium Dutch hook Brummel spliced to one end of the line, and the line runs roughly 30 feet in length. Now, I may shorten this as time goes on just to save a gram or two. Yeah, it's a sickness. Next, I have a very small split ring with a titanium Dutch tarp flies on it attached to one end of the tarp at the ridge peak. On the other peak end, I have a loop of red zinget, lark's headed, to accept the Dutch hook. Now, this allows me to hang the tarp and adjust it left to right without moving to set the lines on each end. Now, this is great to center it between the trees if it's raining, so I have a dry place to set up the hammock, or to set up the hammock in dry weather and then center the tarp over the hammock. Ease of use and adjustability all around. Just set the position, hook the line in the mouth of the fly, use the mechanical advantage to tighten the line, and lock it under the wing. As far as the tie-outs or guy lines go, I went with a reflective Lawson line in red. Yeah, it's kind of a theme. This line is strung through titanium and shock cord Dutch tarp worms. Now, a brief message about tarp pitches. I like them tight, really tight. On my sill, or really any sill nylon tarp, as they heat or cool, they change shape. They tend to sag. So many people will use shock cord on the guy lines in some way to take up the slack and keep the pitch more taut. Now, this really isn't needed for a Dyneema tarp. They are very shape and pitch stable, so they don't sag in the heat or cold. I'm using the tarp worms to move the adjustment point for the line closer to the tarp itself. If it's raining and I need to adjust the tarp corners, I can do so from inside the tarp and get less wet maybe? I don't know. It's handy, and on every tarp worm, I shortened the length of the shock cord by half and saved a gram per worm times 8 tie-outs. So that's 8 grams down just like that. Cool, right? Yeah. So why the woodland camo? Well, I do live in the South, and I'm sure I've been called country or a redneck at some point. And I'm not fulfilling some requirement for me to keep my gentrified men of the South cawed. Really, I'm just hoping to get something a little, if only slightly, more opaque than the standard green. You can still see through the tarp a bit, but it's better than the standard green, and I suppose it does add to the stealthy nature of hiking and camping. I'm not trying to hide, but when I do, I use woodland camo. Hammock gear. Stay dry, my friends. Oh, and let's not forget about the doors. These are a bonus, or a weight penalty, depending on your perspective of the weather. I find that I will typically close one end of the tarp when in camp, and this may be to block the view from other campers nearby or to block the prevailing wind on that end. I'll leave the other end open for ease of egress at P3 when nature is banging on my bladder like a Tongan war drum. Yeah, I'm old. What about it? Your day's coming, millennial. Don't worry. Either way, I can also tie the doors back and be free as a breeze on both ends if I want. So there you have it, my choice for an ultralight tarp for my AT thru hike. all in, lines and everything, which, by the way, stay with the tarp even when it's packaged. The Dyneema tarp has a final weight of just over 10 ounces, half the weight of the tarp I took on my last section hike on the AT. Not too shabby, and just a start. I am just 6 months out from beginning the hike. I still have a new hammock, which hopefully will be here by the end of August, and a new backpack that should be in by the beginning or middle of August. That's a lot of new gear to review and weight I'm hoping to save. You need to be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the bell so you get notified when those videos and a whole lot more hit the channel. I surely hope you enjoyed this. I truly appreciate you watching. And until next week, take a hike and love somebody along the way.